At first glance, Caitlyn Naffziger looked like someone who had figured life out early. Her videos were polished but casual, confident but relatable. She spoke directly to the camera as if she were talking to a close friend, sharing routines, opinions, and moments that felt personal. Thousands of people watched her regularly, trusting her voice, her smile, and the carefully crafted image she presented online. But behind the screen, behind the edits and filters, something darker was quietly unfolding. Caitlyn didn't become popular overnight. Her rise was gradual, built on consistency and the illusion of authenticity. Viewers felt like they knew her. They commented on her videos, defended her online, and celebrated her milestones as if they were their own. To them, she was just another creator chasing a dream. What they didn't see was the pressure building beneath that public persona, or the private conflicts that never made it onto the screen. People close to Caitlyn later described her as driven, deeply concerned with how she was perceived. Success online wasn't just a hobby. It became her identity. Every view, every comment, every drop in engagement mattered. When criticism appeared, even mild criticism, it didn't roll off her shoulders. It stayed with her. According to those who knew her, she had a growing fear of losing control over the narrative of her life. Off-camera, Caitlyn's relationships were far more complicated than her content suggested. Friends noticed changes in her behavior long before anything went wrong. She became more guarded, more secretive. Conversations that once felt easy became tense. There were arguments behind closed doors, unresolved conflicts, and a sense that something was being hidden. But no one imagined how far things would go. The person who would later become central to the investigation was not a stranger. This wasn't a random act, and it wasn't sudden. Their connection to Caitlyn was personal, layered, and emotionally charged. There were disagreements that escalated over time, fueled by jealousy, resentment, and the constant presence of the online world. Messages were exchanged, some emotional, some angry, some later described as alarming. Investigators would eventually piece together a timeline showing that the days leading up to the murder were filled with tension. Caitlyn's online activity continued as usual, giving no hint that anything was wrong. Her posts were upbeat, scheduled, and perfectly timed. But privately, the situation was unraveling. The contrast between her public calm and private chaos would later become one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. On the day everything changed, there was nothing outwardly unusual. No dramatic final post, no clear warning signs for her audience. Life appeared to move forward like any other day, but somewhere between routine actions and ordinary moments, a line was crossed. What happened next would shock not only those who knew her personally, but also the massive audience who believed they knew her too. When Caitlyn was reported dead, the initial reaction was disbelief. Fans refused to accept it. Some thought it was a hoax, a misunderstanding, or online misinformation. But as authorities confirmed the details, reality set in. A young content creator, someone who built a following by inviting people into her life, was gone. And the circumstances of her death were far more disturbing than anyone expected. As the investigation began, digital evidence quickly became a central focus. Caitlyn's phone, her messages, her search history, and her private communications were examined carefully. Investigators weren't just looking at what she shared publicly, but at what she tried to hide. Slowly, a different version of Caitlyn emerged. Not the influencer her audience adored, but a person dealing with intense emotional strain and conflict. Friends were interviewed, then family, then people who had interacted with her recently. Stories began to overlap. Certain names came up repeatedly. Patterns formed. What initially seemed confusing started to make sense in a troubling way. This was not an impulsive act. According to investigators, it showed signs of planning, emotional build-up, and deliberate choices. As more information came out, public opinion shifted. Sympathy mixed with shock, then confusion, and eventually anger. People began asking hard questions. How could someone so visible hide something so serious? How could those closest to her not stop it? And most importantly, how did a life built on attention and validation end in violence? The case exposed something uncomfortable about online fame. The pressure to perform, the fear of being exposed, the blurred line between reality and persona. Caitlyn's story was no longer just about a murder. It became a warning about what can happen when personal struggles are buried under a curated image, and when conflict is allowed to grow unchecked in silence. By the time investigators identified a suspect and outlined their theory, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Media coverage intensified. Online discussions exploded. Everyone had an opinion, a theory, a judgment, but behind the noise was a real loss of life, and a trail of decisions that could never be undone. And as the legal process moved forward, one thing became painfully clear. The version of Caitlyn the world thought it knew was only a fraction of the truth. What remained was a haunting reminder that sometimes the most carefully constructed lives hide the most devastating secrets. As the investigation continued, authorities focused on reconstructing the final hours of Caitlyn Naffziger's life. Surveillance footage, phone pings, and witness statements were all examined to establish who had contact with her and when. Every minute mattered. What emerged was a timeline that contradicted the calm image Caitlyn had maintained online until the very end. Detectives discovered inconsistencies in statements given by someone close to her. Small details didn't align. Times didn't match. Certain messages had been deleted, but not permanently erased. Digital forensic experts were able to recover conversations that revealed rising tension and emotional volatility. These weren't casual disagreements. They were confrontations filled with frustration, control issues, and unresolved anger. According to investigators, the relationship between Caitlyn and the suspect had deteriorated significantly. There were signs of manipulation, emotional pressure, and fear of exposure. Caitlyn's online presence added another layer to the conflict. Private issues risked becoming public, and for someone invested in controlling her image, that threat carried enormous weight. When authorities confronted the suspect with evidence, the story began to change. Initial denials gave way to partial admissions, then silence. Physical evidence supported the investigative theory, placing the suspect at the scene during the critical window of time. What had once been speculation hardened into a case built on data, behavior patterns, and recovered communications. The public reaction was intense. Fans struggled to reconcile the cheerful creator they followed with the disturbing details emerging in court documents and reports. Many felt betrayed, not just by the crime itself, but by the illusion they had believed in. Comment sections turned into digital memorials, debates, and arguments all at once. During legal proceedings, the prosecution painted a picture of escalation. This wasn't a single moment of rage, they argued, but the result of mounting pressure and deliberate choices. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to introduce doubt, questioning interpretations of messages and intent. But the volume of digital evidence made it increasingly difficult to dismiss the narrative investigators had built. What made the case particularly chilling was how ordinary everything looked from the outside. There were no dramatic warning signs broadcast to the world. Caitlyn continued posting, engaging, and smiling. Her audience watched her final videos, unaware they were witnessing the last chapters of her life. In hindsight, some viewers claimed they noticed subtle changes in her tone, her energy, her eyes, but at the time nothing seemed alarming. The trial forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths about parasocial relationships. Millions of people felt connected to Caitlyn, yet none of them truly knew what was happening behind closed doors. Her life had become content, and content had become armor. The screen protected her secrets, until it couldn't anymore. As the verdict approached, attention shifted from speculation to accountability. This was no longer just an internet tragedy. It was a criminal case involving real decisions, real consequences, and irreversible loss. When the court delivered its judgment, reactions were mixed, but intense. Some felt justice had been served. Others felt that no outcome could truly compensate for a life cut short. In the aftermath, Caitlyn's channels went silent. Her videos remained online, frozen in time. For some, watching them became unbearable. For others, it was a way to grieve. Friends and family withdrew from the spotlight, asking for privacy as they tried to rebuild their lives away from the public eye. The case left a lasting impact on the online creator community. Conversations about mental health, boundaries, and the dangers of living entirely for an audience became more urgent. Caitlyn's story was cited as an example of how pressure, secrecy, and unresolved conflict can spiral into tragedy when left unchecked. Ultimately, the murder of Caitlyn Naffziger was not just the fall of a YouTuber, but the collapse of a carefully maintained reality. It revealed how easily a polished image can hide pain, and how dangerous it can be when control matters more than honesty. Behind the views and the likes was a human life. And when that life ended, it left behind questions that still don't have easy answers. Her story remains a haunting reminder that fame does not protect against darkness, and that sometimes the most shocking crimes come from places that looked perfectly normal on screen.